It's great to be here with you today. And right to begin with, I'd love to take you on a little journey. So I'd like to invite you to simply close your eyes, take a nice deep breath, go to a place in nature where you feel at peace, relaxed, and connected to the earth and the sky, where anything is possible, where you could fly with the eagles or swim with the dolphins, and allow the sounds of the flute to open your heart. I want you to notice how differently you feel in just less than a minute of closing your eyes, taking a deep breath, going to a place in nature, and listening. And I invite you now to open your eyes, feeling more centered, more grounded, more present, more here. Music heals. You just experienced a musitation. You probably heard all kinds of different ways to meditate, but you'll never get more simple instructions. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and listen. So just the act of closing your eyes reduced brain activity by 2/3. It's like closing all these windows on your computer. And also taking a deep breath reduces respiration, allows you to reduce your heart rate, your blood pressure, and bring you into the now. We are all today overwhelmed with future shock, information overload, and data smog. Would you agree?
Yes.
We're feeling more overwhelmed than ever. And it's hard to quiet our minds, open our hearts, embrace our souls, and heal our life. I'm Dr. Michael DeMaria, and I have a confession to make. I'm a musaholic. Any musaholics here? I know it's hard to get past the denial, but any musaholics here? You got so bad, I have flutes all over my house. At work, I have them hidden in the car. And yes, I have one here. Music heals. I can tell you this from personal experience. And the sound of this flute has changed my life, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But when I see anything that makes sound in music, I need to play it. I'm an integrative psychologist, yoga meditation, mindfulness teacher. I'm also a best-selling author and poet, and you also were just serenaded by a 4-time Grammy-nominated musician. Thank you. I'm so honored that the music that has healed me in my life has found a place in the hearts of so many other people. I was introduced recently by a gentleman. He said, Dr. DeMaria cures 250,000 people a week with a stick. And I know he was referring to the over 250,000 times my music is heard around the world on Pandora, Spotify, etc. And it's really touched my heart, because music has healed me from the inside out of tragedies and traumas in my life that have been unspeakable at times. But I found people often want to hear the story behind the music. So I'm here to share a bit of that with you today. But I'm going to play this first. Many of these early flutes, we have the first flute we found 45,000 years ago, one of the first instruments on the planet. And many of the first flutes were made to imitate bird sounds. put my little flask back in here. So, music heals. I first learned this when I was just 7 years old. I had quite a few surgeries as a child. And this particular one I had on my abdomen, and it was 200 stitches inside and outside. And I felt very betrayed by my body, by the adult world. I wasn't sure these doctors knew what they were doing when I woke up and I could barely walk and I could barely breathe. And it's so interesting to me that now so much of my life is revolving around helping people breathe right and breathing into these instruments. So I felt very disconnected from the world. Anybody feel ever disconnected from your world? Raise your hands. Feeling like your life is like a dream, like you're watching it, like a spectator? Anybody? Okay. That's where I was. And then something very, very interesting happened. I found myself going into the living room, and I loved that there was a piece of furniture that made noise. My parents called it a piano. And I would sit down, I'd close my eyes, and I'd lift up my hand, and then I was like Mr. Magician, and then I would boom, land on one note. And I loved hearing that note arise out of silence, and then I would wait till that sound dissipated off back into silence. And then I'd lift up my hand, take another deep breath, and do my little magic trick, and drop it on another note. And I'd do that over and over and over again. And I realized looking back on it as a psychologist that I was doing a form of sound healing, kind of putting myself into a trance or meditating at 7 years old, totally spontaneously. My parents just thought I was autistic. And to be honest, I was probably on the spectrum. I probably still am. I tend to only wear black wherever I go. And I was painfully shy. I was deeply introverted. I didn't talk till I was almost 3. And I also was very highly sensitive. But I realized something very powerful about this kind of music, where I was listening deeply, and this experience of silence and sound. Whenever I play music, I always imagine playing a duet with silence. But how did that playing one note on the piano at a time lead to this stick and healing? So many years later, as an adult, because of my childhood trauma, I was called to work with traumatized children, in particular children in the area of child abuse and neglect. Over 10 years, I worked as a child protection team psychologist and was on the state legislative task force for child abuse and neglect in the state of Florida. Over that time, I worked with over 2,000 cases of child abuse and neglect. I testified in over 100 cases. And I felt like I was doing a good job in making a difference in the world. But all that changed one day. I was asked to evaluate some children who was suspected was being abused by this gentleman. And I did my best to try to evaluate them and discover whether or not they were being abused. But my evaluation turned up nothing. I couldn't rule out the abuse, but I couldn't confirm it. And therefore, this man continued to walk free. Shortly thereafter, he took one of these children out into the woods and raped them and murdered them. 6 years old. And my heart and my soul were shattered. Neither the science of psychology, with all of its theories, nor even my traditional religious upbringing prepared me to deal with the sense of grief, the sense of guilt, and just the senseless horror of this tragedy. Has anybody ever felt that sense of regret, guilt, overwhelm? Then through a series of amazing synchronicities, I call them God incidences, not coincidences, and the grace of God, I found myself on a Native American reservation, being guided by a Native elder in something that's sometimes called a vision quest or a vision fast. But my teacher explained to me He said, Michael, in our language, we call this the lament in the wild, or the lamentation. And I have to warn you, you'll be out there alone without food or water for days. And you could die. And I was like, sign me up. He also told me that the lament is about humbling yourself, getting on your knees and praying and opening your heart to Creator. And that you need to feel to heal. And I was so scared to touch the grief that was inside of me. That felt like an ocean of tears. But he said, you know, in your culture, you know what scared us most about the white man? First, that he was unaware of his breath. And we knew anybody who was unaware of their breath was insane. I think he was right. The other one was they thought crying was a weakness. And we knew anybody who thought crying was a weakness would have no mercy. So trust your tears, because we have something called a heart warrior. He said, you know, when we teach our warriors to do their first kill, which is for livelihood, for their feeding their families. For instance, a deer you'd have to track day and night because you had to only use a knife. So you would have to get to know that deer like a brother or a sister. So when you took its life, you would cry. And if you didn't cry when you took its life, you were never allowed to hunt again, because you wouldn't understand that all things are connected and we are part of a great circle of life, and it is the grief that connects us. In their language, the word for how are you doing is oki sanadabiwa, which means how are your connections? A very different way to greet each other. So I went out on that lament in the wild, that vision quest, and I cried and I cried. I cried for that child. I saw all the stories and faces of all the children I'd worked with all those years come back to me. And when I opened that door of my heart, I found all the other tears I hadn't grieved. Grieved for feeling my failures as a husband, as a father, as a son, as a brother, as a psychologist. But as I cried and I grieved and I poured my heart out to the sky and to the earth, something else started coming through. This great, profound love. Just a love, as Dante said, moves the sun and all the other stars. And I realized everything was part of this. And my teacher said, Michael, if grief could make a sound, you couldn't hear anything else. And it's the emotion underneath all the other emotions. I promise you, every killing out there is a result of someone who hasn't cried their tears that need to be felt and shed. And then I heard this sound. And there was something about the bittersweet, somber, melancholy beauty of this flute that just healed me. The Cherokee call this instrument the long human being, because they say Creator has to hollow us out so she can play us. And that's why we suffer, they said. And that's why we have to allow our hearts to be broken open, because when a broken, open heart occurs, we then begin to experience compassion and empathy. They even say, don't trust anyone until their heart has been broken, because that is the origin of compassion. And it's the doorway to finding our soul. The other beautiful thing he explained to me was that our gifts, because I had learned to quiet my mind, open my heart, but to embrace my soul, I was going, but how can I go back into the world? I don't know who I am anymore. And he said, our gifts are born from our wounds and through our wounds. And it's by healing ourselves we have the capacity to heal and help others. So the teacher who made my first flute said, don't play for anyone for a year and play only at night and listen for the song of your soul, because we each have a soul print as individual, unique as this fingerprint. And the way we find it is to feel all of who we are, to feel, to heal, and to allow our heart breaks to open us to soul embrace. And so now it is my mission to try to help people feel to heal through my music, my poetry, my films, and really, most importantly, to help everyone know that deep inside each one of our hearts, there lies an ever-flowing spring of love, a love that can heal the deepest wound and calm the greatest fear. It's what I call the great loving, and it's connected to the great song. And a vision for myself now is I'm working on becoming a world peace ambassador through music. Because music cuts across all racial, gender, national, ethnic barriers. I have people listening to my music in 171 countries around the world. People who don't speak English can hear the sounds of this flute and they know what it means. And so my greatest joy is being able to share that, because my conviction is each one of you and each one of us are the note in the song of peace that the world needs today to heal our polarization and our conflicts, so we can begin to connect and realize we are all part of the great song, which flows like a river, like all the rivers that feed the great oceans of this world. And it begins with feeling all of who we are. And I want to leave you with a little last song. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes again, take a deep breath, go to a place in nature where you feel connected to your heart, to the sky and to the earth, hearing the songbirds, and allow the flute to take you home to your soul. And when you're ready, taking your time, thank your medicine place for being there for you. Open your eyes and thank you for being such an amazing, wonderful, beautiful audience. It's an honor to be here with you today.